If you're looking for more horror outside of the mainstream, look no further than Unsung Horrors, a podcast about underseen horror movies. I'm Lance.
And I'm Erica. Every other week, we'll cover a horror movie with fewer than 1,000 views on Letterboxd. We'll even give you double feature recommendations to pair with the movies we discuss.
From gothic to shot on video, from slashers to comedies, from giallo to J-horror, we'll cover all the subgenres. So join us as we unearth these hidden gems of horror.
Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, all at Unsung Horrors, available wherever you listen to podcasts. And part of the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.
Hello there, and welcome back to the Disc Connected. I'm here with Kurtis Spieler, who is a restoration artist for Vinegar Syndrome. Love that title. Kurtis, thanks for doing this with me.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me.
I got a lot to cover, of course, but first, for anybody that's watching, I'm sure one of the big things that they want to know is working for a boutique that many of us love and adore. How did you get started with Vinegar Syndrome?
So Vinegar Syndrome is in Connecticut, which is where I was born and raised, and
that's got to help.
Yeah, that does help a lot. There's no easy way to get into this type of industry, right? To be honest. I apologize, by the way, if you hear a fire truck go by, because our building is literally located right between a police department and a fire station. So there's always stuff going by. But I lived in Connecticut, and I knew one of the Brandon Upson, who's one of the restoration artists here. I knew him prior to this, and I just reached out to the company one time and was like, hey, listen, I'm a filmmaker in Connecticut. If you guys ever need any help with anything, let me know. And they had me do a couple of special features and recording some interviews and stuff like that. And just over time, they offered me a job here, and I took it, and it's 6 years later, and I'm still here. So
somebody that is a restoration artist, what are you working on a film when you get one of these in?
Well, so basically, for people who don't know the process, when we acquire the rights to a film, we try to hunt down the best source possible, which would be the original camera negative. And if we can get our hands on that, we bring it in, we scan it, and we have a digital output that's then created. Then we go through and we clean up the dirt and the dust and the scratches and any issues like that. That's the simple version of what we do. It gets a lot more complicated, especially if people are familiar with the types of films that we put out. They're not always taken the best care of. We definitely get into the down and dirty when it comes to the films that we work on. And so sometimes we have to find multiple sources. Things are damaged. We have to piece things back together. You might have, the original camera negative, but it could be missing a reel. And then we've got to hunt down that reel from another surviving source. So it can get very interesting. But basically the short version is, yes, we go through and we do a digital cleanup of the film and try to get it back to what it would have looked like when it showed at a movie theater back in the 70s, 80s, whenever it was originally made.
There is only a handful of years that you've been at Vinegar Syndrome so far, and in that time, the stuff that we've seen released, is there a title that comes to mind that you go, yeah, that one was a goddamn nightmare?
Oh, man. Yes. There's a few of them. Thriller, A Cruel Picture. That was a particularly difficult one. And sorry, we are a working company, so there's people coming in the office. Yeah, Thriller was a particularly difficult one. Luckily, we were able to get back to the original camera negative. It just was, kind of dirty, took a lot of work. Beastmaster was another one. That was one of our first UHDs, and we weren't able to get the original camera negative. We had the inner positive, which is basically a level down. But a lot of the studio pictures, that's all they keep. It's hard to get back to the original negative. So that being one of our early UHDs that took a lot of work. So those two are the first that come to mind. Oh, and A Blade in the Dark. For anybody who's seen that, we released that last year for our Halfway to Black Friday sale. That one was particularly difficult for me. I also do some sound restoration, and I'm usually the one who's kind of responsible for piecing things back together if there's problems and all that. And not to get into it too much, but there's a lot of sound issues with Blade in the Dark because there were multiple cuts that were made. There was like a TV cut versus the theatrical cut, and the sound sources didn't match, and it took a lot of work to get that to where it is. And those are kind of the three that come to mind.
I like that you bring up A Blade in the Dark. Funny enough, I think it was about 3 months before Vinegar Syndrome announced their UHD that I was going to appear on somebody else's show, and we were going to talk about A Blade in the Dark, and I had not seen it yet, so I went to go seek out where to find it, and of course, it's on shitty Tubi, so I got to watch it on Tubi, and it was the old, like, really awful scan of it that did nothing to, excite anybody about the colors or what was happening in the movie, and it was just a bad experience with the restoration. And this is the perfect example of a movie that I thought was pretty ho-hum, like barely even average, but watching an upgraded restoration of it, that movie changes dramatically. And the work that you guys did on that was astonishing.
Thank you. Yeah, a lot of hard work went into that. Well, and I'm glad you bring that up because I've noticed that myself. Films that sometimes you see a like garbage version of it that was put out, and you're like, okay, whatever, it was fine. And then you see a new restoration, and it kind of gives you a whole new appreciation of the film. Yeah. And that's happened to me working here. I'm like, oh, we're putting that out, it's okay, and then I work on it, and I see the restoration, I see the final product, and you start to appreciate things like the cinematography or the lighting or things that you just didn't appreciate the first time around. So Thank you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. And again, it's not meant as the kiss ass or anything. It's really to highlight the amount of work that goes into some of these things. And with those three that you mentioned specifically, they are UHD, all three of them. And for many people that are in this hobby, right now is a rough time when you start talking about 4K, because everybody out there is either complaining that a title is not 4K, saying they're not going to buy something until it is 4K, or something else. And I love that you brought all three of these up. Is your work one of the things that goes in behind deciding if you do 4K or not?
The big thing that usually determines whether or not we do a 4K is if we have the original camera negative. We have done UHDs from interpositives, like I said, which is the next generation down, but we try to get the original camera negative. I think it kind of comes down to a couple of things. Has it been released? Are there multiple versions of the Blu-ray already out there? Is it something that could really benefit from a UHD? The color. One of the things with UHDs for people that don't know is it has more color space, so you can get a better contrast, better color, things of that nature. So if there's something that has really good cinematography, good lighting, things like that, that might encourage us to do a UHD. But there's a number of things that kind of go into that decision. Sometimes that's more of the higher ups that decide kind of what is going to be a UHD and what's not. But for the most part, it's really, do we think we can improve on either the versions that have been put out, or does this film just kind of warrant one? And honestly, as we move forward, it's starting to just become the, I don't know. I don't want to say like the main version of films, the main source, but as the technology is progressing, people are getting more used to UHDs. So, will it replace Blu-ray? I can't say for sure, but it's like when the DVD transition happened with Blu-rays. It was kind of a boutique thing to have a Blu-ray, and now everybody has Blu-ray. So we'll see what the future holds and what technology offers us as we move forward.
Yeah, and the big thing is people need to level expectations, because not every boutique has the resources of Vinegar Syndrome either. And man, UHD is expensive to put out. That's one of the other big things.
It is a lot of work. It requires more restoration. It requires more time. It requires more encoding. There's just, and then the QC process, when we go through and we spot check, or not spot check, but we watch the whole films to make sure there are no issues in the encoding or anything like that. It's a bigger, more complicated process that just puts in really a lot more man hours than anything else. And time is money. and that's, for any business. So, we have to weigh the cost factor when it comes into that part of it.
That's a big part of it. And one thing that most of your, we'll say, legacy with Vinegar Syndrome so far is probably wrapped up in New York Ninja. Would you say that's the case?
Yeah, that was a big thing for me, definitely. You want to get into it? We can kind of talk about it.
We do. I mean, I know that you are all over the discs, and so I don't want to rehash the same thing for everybody, because obviously it's like one of the most, not to like kiss ass to you, but one of the most important, in my opinion, at least, projects the last handful of years. This, the Lost Picture Show from VS last year, probably something like the Black Emanuel box set from Severin. Those are some of the more like, how the fuck did we pull this off type of things. But the big thing, could you share for everybody, before I start asking some questions, what New York Ninja is if they happen to have not seen it yet?
Sure. So basically, New York Ninja was a movie that was originally shot in 1984. And for production and budgetary issues, the movie was never finished and was subsequently abandoned. I start working for Vinegar Syndrome, and I find out that in our film archive, we have all the original unedited camera rolls for New York Ninja. So that's just, unedited picture, basically. The only problem was all the sound elements were missing. So we had unedited picture for an unfinished movie and no sound. And
small problem.
Just a small problem. So I talked to the owners here. They were trying to figure out if there was anything we could do with it. And myself being a filmmaker, I decided if I would approach them and ask them if they would be willing to let me finish it, and if they'd give me a budget to let me kind of piece this thing together and see what I could do with it. And they agreed. And so basically over about a 2-year process, I worked on piecing the film together, creating a coherent story out of the footage that was there. I wrote new dialogue. We brought in some of our favorite genre actors to dub the voices, and a band called Voyager 3, who's an amazing band, did an original score. And basically we were able to finish this movie that was abandoned 35 years prior. So
watched it again this week, showed my wife this time, and wore the shirt in celebration.
Thank you.
I've got so much from it. This project has been something since I very first heard about it, just inspiring to hear the amount of passion that somebody can have for something like this. And my love for archiving things and restoring things and all that it's amazing to see something like this realized. Like, it's one thing to dream about it, but to see somebody be given the budget and actually pull it off, and now it's playing in theaters and stuff like that is so rare, first off. So congratulations. I know I've not been able to speak to you in person ever before this, but that's such a big deal. But you are all over these discs, so I don't want to go too much into detail. I want to tell everybody, if you've never bought it, go buy New York Ninja, support it, love it, live it. I don't know what else to say about that. But the big thing, there's not much documented on your response to it. So I'd love to hear, like, how do you feel about the rollout and how everybody's responded to this film?
Yeah, I mean, it's been interesting as like I said, I've made a couple low budget films prior to this, and it's interesting because you hope that your projects get out there and they get seen, and you get to have some kind of notoriety off of them. This is weird to have it happen for a movie that's kind of not mine. Like it is and it isn't. So, but it's really interesting because I know that there's some people out there who don't realize what went into making the movie. I've read reviews, and people who just have stumbled across it and watched it didn't realize that all the restoration that went into it. And it's oddly kind of a compliment, because I mean, what we tried to do is really try to make it as authentic as possible to the period that it would have been released. And, working on these movies here at Vinegar Syndrome, I like to think I have a pretty good idea of the style of films that were made at that time. So I really just tried to make something that would live up to what would have been released at the time. And I think I achieved that. So in a weird way, when people don't know what went into it, that's kind of like a big compliment. Not knowing that I was involved is, but at the same time too, it's kind of hit this cult status right away. And I think a lot of filmmakers strive for that. And to kind of have it to be part of a cult film is kind of cool. And it's almost like I went back in time and made a movie that got released now and is getting the kind of love. So yeah, it's interesting. Thank you.
The cool thing is there's so many projects that we've seen. I hate to use the word fail, but we've seen fail over the years that people try to make a cult film that they're not doing something in earnest in respect to the filmmaking. And this could have easily just been like an impossible project to make come out and feel earnest, and yet every single scene does, and all of the voice acting is on point. And honestly, I think one of the biggest things that holds it all together is Voyager 3's score. Like, the score on this film is astounding.
Yeah, they went above and beyond. I can't give them enough credit, and I have to also give credit to there's a company called 3 Beep out of New York. They helped a lot with the voiceovers and the dubbing and that kind of stuff. It's hard to get it to be period accurate, and it. Something like this, there's a lot of humor for the people who haven't seen it. There's a lot of humor kind of baked into it, but I didn't really go out of my way to add any humor. We've all watched these movies here that movies like Samurai Cop or like Miami Connection or something like that, where it's like somebody went to go kind of make a serious project, and but it has this like kind of campy, fun vibe to it, and we can all enjoy it and laugh and have a good time with it. And that's the type of film that this is. But I didn't want to add any more humor than kind of what was there. There was some choices that I made here and there to kind of amp things up. I'm like, when I'm in the edit, I'm like, okay, should I do it like this or do it like this? Right. It might be a little bit funnier if it's like this. And so, I would keep that, but I didn't go out of my way to make jokes or to do like to write dialogue that would be too jokey or like a mystery science kind of thing. I didn't want to do that. We wanted to just pay as much respect to that era of filmmaking as possible. So.
And you bring up one of the things that I found most fascinating on the disc, actually, is the scenes that were not in your edit and your commentary on why they weren't in the edit. And I think it is much more frank than we hear from most directors, primarily because it wasn't your film. And so it's not like you were, man, when I shot this, we were super proud of this day. It's more of like, this didn't work, so there was no reason to include it. And for anybody that's interested in the process behind it, I heartily recommend it. And it's I think it was like 25 minutes long or something like that. But that featurette, I felt like was maybe the most important piece on that entire disc.
Thank you. Well, as an editor, I kind of fell into editing in the sense that I wanted to more or less be a filmmaker. But when you're working on a budget, you tend to write your own stuff, you tend to direct it, and then you tend to edit it. And I do think anybody who's out there listening who wants to get into the film business, as a director, you should know how to edit. I think it's very important. It helps teach you what to kind of shoot. You learn what works and what doesn't. But when you're on a low budget film, you don't have time to go back and do reshoots and all that. So when you get into the editing room and you find out there's problems, you have to figure out how to fix them yourself. And so all that training, all the mistakes that I made on my film helped me to fix the mistakes that were made on this film, because that's one of the reasons it was never finished. It was kind of a mess. But having to make the choice as an editor to cut stuff that I've shot myself, you have to be willing to do that. And so, that training, I think, kind of helped when it came to New York Ninja, because I could look at it objectively and say, okay, that's just not going to work. This has run too long. And, there were debates here as well, too. The beach fight, for example, for anybody who's seen the outtakes, or the deleted scenes, there's a beach fight, and a couple people, the original cut had that one in there. Some of the stuff just didn't even make the original cut, but that was originally in there. And when I decided to cut that, there was some debate here in the building about it. And people were like, no, keep that. And I'm like, it doesn't advance anything. It slows everything down. And, so sometimes you just have to make those hard choices, but at least you have the special features so that people can see them.
And you have written and edited some of your own things before this. How does the process compare? Like, do you feel like this was a more difficult undertaking?
It was, because I've never done anything like it. And really, there's no roadmap for it, because very few people have done anything like this. So I just had to kind of trust my instincts and make decisions that I thought would benefit the project. Again, it one of the great things is being here at Vinegar Syndrome. I mean, we are literally surrounded by these films every day. I mean, day in and day out, we're working on this stuff. So it's like, it just kind of becomes ingrained in you. And so, you see little things that were done in certain movies, like in New York Ninja, where it ends in the freeze frame. I mean, that's pretty standard stuff. But like when you're watching these movies and you see them do something, you're like, oh yeah, that I got to do that. I can use that to fix this. You start to find little things like that. So, I mean, really, it's just kind of a love letter to the genre, and I just kind of went with my instincts, and seems like it worked. So.
Same with all the voice casting. Obviously, a love letter to lots of genre films. Big fan of Michael Berryman in this house. He is incredible. I thought he was maybe my favorite standout from New York Ninja. For anybody that is miraculously both watching this interview in the future and has the wonderful happenstance to do what you just did for New York Ninja, what would you have done differently? Looking back on this process, what would you tell somebody else to maybe do different?
I don't know. That's a tough call. I mean, now that I understand how the dubbing process works more, I think I might have been able to tighten that up slightly.
Right.
I tried to match what was it. The hard part was we were dubbing English over English, which you don't normally see. It's usually a foreign film. But
yeah.
If anybody who knows their genre films, like you take maybe an Italian film, like a Giallo or something, there might be a mix of different types of actors in there. There might be American actors, Italian actors, German actors, and they're all speaking their own language. And then it all gets dubbed at the end of the day. So I've seen English dubbed over English before, and so I actually kind of used like the European films as an inspiration more than like Hong Kong or martial arts films. But I think knowing the process of how this works a little bit more, I probably could have tightened that up a little bit. I watch it now and I'm like, I could have done that a little bit differently. So probably the dubbing, just because it was all new to me at the time. So.
Well, and the other big thing that is a big part of the disc too is not only is this all brand new to you, but then you're entering COVID too. So that's got to be a huge wrench into everything.
It hit at like kind of the wrong time, like it did for everybody. But in a weird way, though, there were some benefits because a lot of studios became really good at remote recording. Yeah. So like sound studios, music studios, they all became good at remote recording. And so it actually helped us maybe cast some people that we wouldn't have been able to normally. All the main voices, we tried to cast actors that were in other movies that Vinegar Syndrome put out. So we kind of limited ourselves right away, who was even alive or who right. has been in the movies that we've put out. So we limited ourselves right off the bat. And so to find the right people who fit the parts was difficult. But at that time, everybody was kind of spread out. And so we had people in Canada, we had people in Florida, we had people in Los Angeles, we had people in Las Vegas. And we were able to just talk to studios out in those places, book the actor to come in, do the remote recording. So I would be here in Connecticut, 3Beep was in New York, the actor would be wherever, let's say Las Vegas, and we were all tied in together and we're able to do it. And that's kind of how it's done a lot now. My wife actually works for a recording studio, and that's how it's all done now. Like, it's rare that the director even comes in anymore, because they find whoever's closest to the actor, and then everybody right. remote links in. So in that sense, it kind of helped. But yeah, it was, at the time when COVID hit, it like just hit the brakes on the project. And I was like, oh man, I had already been working like a year on it, but I mean, a lot of people went through similar things. So, right. we all made it through.
Funny enough, the way the timing is working out on my channel and everything, I'm planning on releasing this on John Liu's 80th birthday, just as a bit of a little remembrance and honor to him, because this is such a crazy thing, and I know that he's out there somewhere still alive. I wish that he had at least a little feeling on this. I'd love to hear what he thought about this whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, as far as we know, he's in Vietnam. And we tried to get in touch with him, but it just didn't work out. So, to my knowledge, he doesn't really want anything to do with his prior film career. So just kind of is what it is, you know?
Yeah, I had that with another project recently. There's so many people. I'd love to know why.
Yeah.
One of the reasons that I got in contact with you is I was talking to Oscar Bescher, and he said, you really should talk to Kurtis because he touches every single thing that leaves the Vinegar Syndrome office. So, I mean, lately, there's so many titles that are just kind of off the wall choices, and it's Vinegar Syndrome, so that's always been the case. But what are some of the ones recently that you feel like a personal connection to with what you've worked on them?
Oh, man, I mean, there are definitely some films that I've like dug in deep on, more so than others. Like I know I already mentioned Blade in the Dark, but I'm pretty proud of the work that went into that one. So I feel definitely like a personal connection to that. I mean, sometimes it's just the movies themselves. We've already announced it's not out yet, but we already announced for our halfway to Black Friday sale that we're doing Navy SEALs, and for me, that was a nostalgia piece for me. I grew up in that time period, and I grew up on action movies and horror movies, and so like a film like that was very much. I was very excited when we got that one, and so it's nice when you have something that you remember as a kid watching, and then all of a sudden you're here working on it and restoring it. So there's definitely those personal connections, but there's just some movies like one of the ones when people always ask me like, what are some of the, my favorite movies that Vinegar Syndrome put out? There's a movie called Sudden Fury that I am a huge fan of that I feel like does not get a lot of love here. And that was early in my career here at Vinegar Syndrome. That was one of the early ones that I restored, and that's when I knew like I loved this job, because all of a sudden I'm working on this movie that I had never heard of, and not a lot of people know what it is, and we're working on it, and I'm watching it and discovering it, and at the end of the day I was like, oh my god, this movie is amazing, and it's like one of my top films that I really, really love it, and I'm like, it's so cool to be working at a company where that can happen, where, you're discovering movies as you're working on them. And, there's a lot of stuff. I mean, all the Lost Picture stuff, I mean, nobody had ever really seen that. So we're constantly discovering new films here, as, employees that work here. But Sudden Fury is one of those ones that just stands out for me, because it just really hit me when I was working on that one.
Since this is coming out May 20th, which is the week that the Halfway to Black Friday sale is going to be starting, Navy SEALs, you brought it up. What could you try to sell somebody on that's maybe never seen it?
If you are like an 80s action fan and you have never seen Navy SEALs, you have to just stop what you're doing right now and just go watch the movie. I mean, it was at Charlie Sheen's like peak where he was just in everything. But Michael Biehn, if you've seen Aliens and you've seen Terminator, you know who Michael Biehn is. He's awesome in it. For me, it's just, again, it's a nostalgia piece. It's just a fun action movie, and it kind of like ticks all the right boxes. So if you're a fan of that kind of stuff, definitely do yourself a favor and check out Navy SEALs.
The restoration work, I would love to hear about how you learn to do that process, because obviously for a lot of us, it is not something that you come across in like random everyday life. So how was your training? What was your education like on this? I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, I mean, there really, at least to my knowledge, there's not a lot of actual training out there for restoration. Maybe there is now that there are more film schools and things like that. I don't know, but I didn't have any experience. What I had experience in was film. That was one of sort of the requirements when I started working here. Yes, I had done my own independent films. Most of them were digital. However, when I went to film school all those years ago, we were still shooting film. So I did have a knowledge of film and understanding film, and even the simple difference between what 35 millimeter film versus 16 millimeter film is knowledge that not a lot of people have these days. So any kind of film knowledge goes a long way. The rest of it was sort of on the job training. I mean, it's learning to work with the programs. Luckily, I had obviously already a background in editing, which helped a lot for this. And, again, a lot of what I do is sort of fixing things. So I'm in Premiere working on things, not just in our restoration software. So really it was having like a background in editing went a long way for me. But again, as far as the actual restoration, unless you have the software yourself, you have to kind of learn on the job.
With editing being such an important part of that answer, I would love to hear, because obviously great editing should be fairly like unnoticeable. You shouldn't really be able to pay attention to it that much. But for somebody learning editing, you feel like every single thing that you edit is the most jarring change in the world, and it's just trash at first. What has inspired you? Like, what type of editing is something that makes you say, this is what I yearn for? Like, were there certain movies that were important to you for editing? Because that's not something we talk about very much.
No, it's not. Editing is one of those tough things that, you can take classes on it, but I don't know if you can really teach it. Nope. You can teach little techniques and like, okay, here's what you want to do. You want to cut on the action, or you want to do this, or you don't want to put these two shots next to each other. But the rest of it, I really do feel like it's kind of like just a feeling. I think you kind of know when things work and when they don't. I look back at some of my older stuff and I'm like, that wasn't, the editing could be a little bit tighter, but I really think it's one of those things. The more you do it, the more your brain learns what works and what doesn't. It's kind of like writing in that sense. Like you can learn the techniques for writing, but if you don't have the ability to sit there and like creatively write something, write believable dialogue or whatever it is, I don't know if you can really teach it. So I would say to anybody out there who is an inspiring editor, just keep editing. Watch movies, watch and see what works and what doesn't work, because that's the thing is most people, when you're watching a movie, like you said, you don't notice the editing. So you have to actually stop yourself and actually watch the editing. And actually sometimes you're surprised with what they get away with. There's edits I've seen in movies that I would have never made that edit, but when I saw it, it glanced over me, and then I went back and watched it and I was like, wow, they did that? I was like, I don't know if I would have done that, but it worked. So
do you remember a couple of those offhand?
No, not offhand, but there was something. There was like an action movie or something. It might have been like one of the Bourne movies or something, because they're shot sort of chaotically. Yep. And actually, this wasn't me noticing it. I was watching a YouTube video, and they were pointing out the different fighting styles, and there was something that like I noticed in the edit that I was like, oh my god, I would have done that, like the way the camera like jumped around, and who knows what they shot, and maybe that's all they had to work with, but I was like, oh wow, I never would have done that. And but at the time it kind of like worked. So
I feel like it's an art form that is kind of getting muddled a little bit, and what we're teaching is to, I really hate to go down this rabbit hole, but like we're teaching to this whole ADHD YouTube culture of TikTok videos, and teaching people only engage the viewer's eyes at this part of the screen, and you're trying to keep people interested for a short period of time. And that's where you get things like these action sequences that have 43 cuts, and obviously that's trying to hide like Liam Neeson being old and stuff in some of these movies. But at the same time, it is absolutely a style change. And when you're looking at those compared to, the early 90s action sequences that hold on a scene for 3 minutes at a time, my goodness, is that a little bit jarring to compare the two of those.
Well, and it's not only the action sequences, but it's the dialogue sequences.
Yes.
Everything's getting cuttier, and they've talked about that, how the length of time between shots has shortened on average because of modern movies. And you might watch something like, especially movies in, let's say, like the 80s or 90s, where instead of relying on the cut or the edit, they would rely on the camera movement or rely on the acting, and so they would hold the shot longer, and you don't see as much of that anymore. And so that is a thing for me. I do sometimes wonder if I'm going to age out, because I'm a little bit more like in the classic sense of an editor. I like to kind of hold things maybe a little bit longer. There were some things in New York Ninja that I chose to hold longer, maybe even a little too long, because that's kind of the style of the time. But that I think it's just, it is kind of changing filmmaking. And so, I see editors nowadays, especially like you said, like TikTok videos, things like that. Granted, jump cuts are like, everything's jump cut. You might have somebody talking and there's like, 10 cuts in one sentence just so that they can get it out there. But, just editing tricks, digital tricks, all those, the little bag of tricks that people pull from, that's not really my style. I like a classical edit. I like to try to like focus on the performance and making it smooth and all that kind of stuff. So, I guess everybody has their own style. You like a director, you're going to pick a certain editor who works in a certain way. But I wonder where it's all going to go. Are things just going to get faster and faster? Am I going to age out of this industry at some point?
It's wild to think about, because some of these, like New York Ninja, I guarantee they didn't have like 5 cameras of coverage on every shot. Obviously,
they didn't have art. It was bad enough to get coverage with one camera. There was very little to work with at times. Yeah.
So with some of these, you're looking at the way they film them, and sure, if you're filming on an iPhone, you can have 4 different crew members filming from different angles, and that feels like nothing. But what are you gaining out of that, or really learning, if you have so much of the ability to film from every angle?
Yeah, well, and that's a big debate nowadays, especially. So, back then they shot in film. Film was expensive, especially if it was a lower budget film. So the movie, you don't want to just run the film while you're on set. It's going to burn through your budget. So if you had one camera, you had to figure out how to shoot things, and people would generally shoot for the edit. So you would have in your head already as the director, okay, how can we do this? We'll cut from this. So you shoot this part, move the camera, shoot this part. It's all time and money. Nowadays, they're running digital cameras. You can run them almost all day long as as you have a hard drive that can hold the space. And, it's changing the way filmmaking is even done in the first place. I can't say whether it's good or bad. It really all depends upon the project, who the person is, and all that. Yep. But there's definitely a big difference now with the way things are run on sets. So,
well, and you're losing things like storyboarding. It's less important because it's easy to change something up and shoot it 4 different ways and just see what comes out best.
Yeah. Well, and again, I think there's something to be said for me. Again, a good friend of mine, Adrian Correa, he's a cinematographer. He just worked on the latest Walking Dead. Him and I have been friends for years, and he works with a lot of different directors. And he's said that you can tell who learned on film and who learned on digital because they run the camera differently. And, we'll see if that changes over time. But for myself, learning how to shoot film, if I'm going out to shoot something, I'm almost always going to pre-edit in my head and try to shoot as close as possible to the edit. Now, sometimes you get into the editing room and you realize, I should have actually gotten some more coverage than I did. Then you got to figure out how to fix it. But yeah, I think it changes the way filmmakers think. And I think it's important to, even if you're shooting digital, plan your edit ahead of time, because I think it'll change you as a director, and you might make an interesting choice to hold a scene from like one angle, whereas if you're running 4 cameras, you're like, okay, well, we'll just get the coverage and we'll figure it out in the edit. Sure. And then you might just decide to keep it from one camera. But I think when you make that choice on set, it feels more organic, and it feels like that's how it was meant to be shot. So, I don't know.
That's a good call. Your film background itself, what have you always been a fan of? What are you looking to watch when you're in your own free time?
Oh man, I watch everything. I mean, I was raised on horror movies and action movies. I've always been a genre fan. I mean, I will watch anything, but action horror. I mean, I see every horror movie that basically comes out in the theater, at least, on Shudder or whatever. It's hard to keep up with everything that comes out now. But I'll pretty much go to the theater to see any horror movie. I just love them. So,
as someone who's worked in low budget horror, how do you feel about horror in 2024? Because obviously there's a lot of talk over the last couple of years about what's been good, what's been bad, and
I mean, we're definitely in the age of like horror films having a message. There's a lot of that. Now, I get that the industry has always had that. I mean, everybody talks about like how Romero's films were social commentaries and all that. But I think the difference is the film came first, the social commentary came second. I think there's a lot of films that are being made now where the social commentary is first and then the film is second. That's not particularly my cup of tea. So we'll see how things, the horror genre changes with the decades. So, we're definitely in a very obviously political decade and there's a lot of social commentary and all that. So, not my favorite. If I'll be honest, I've found myself just, especially in this job, we work on older horror films and I just found myself recently going back and just watching older stuff more and more, because I miss the escapism. And that's one of the best things about the horror genre is the escapism. So, I don't know. We'll kind of see. We'll see what's next. We went through the found footage era. We went through the J horror era. There's always another trend with horror films. But what I like about that, even though they can be like trendy and once you see one of a certain style you'll see a bunch of them, but I think the creativity that comes out of that is kind of interesting. So you never know where who's going to make what next. That's just going to kind of turn the genre. So
any from the last couple of years that have struck you as particularly creative that you've appreciated?
Ooh, probably, but off the top of my head that's a little tough. Last couple of years, I don't know. Yeah, it's putting me on the spot. I'd have to think about that.
Totally understand it.
Yeah.
With editing, is there any certain thing that you feel like is your calling card? Because I know for a lot of editors, there's a lot of things that they go, yeah, I do this a lot.
No, I don't know. It's tough. I don't know what my calling card would be. I'd have to, because as a filmmaker, most of the time you don't like your own movies. I think it's rare when you do. You have to get away from them and see them years later. So like right now, I think about the stuff that I've made and I'm not a huge fan of it. I mean, I am proud of some of the things on New York Ninja. I'm proud of how I was able to make some of the scenes work. I mean, sometimes I had very little to work with and, to make those work. But I think like editors are kind of the unsung heroes because you don't know what they had to work with. Right. So, you might, if you're an editor and you had a director that shot a ton of footage with all different cameras and all this other kind of stuff, you have a mess of stuff that you have to work with. You have to file it down to the most important. But you have all that coverage to work with. Then you have the editors that it might have been a one camera shoot and now they have very little coverage and they got to figure out how to make that scene work. So, without knowing the raw material that people had to work with, I think it is kind of hard to gauge whether something is a good edit. And it's like, what's better? The guy who takes a million shots and narrows them down to, one cohesive scene, or somebody who had very little and made a really good scene. I don't know. It's hard to tell. So, yeah.
It's a good philosophical question.
Yeah.
Gosh, one thing that I do want to say then is one thing that people don't seem to look at editing as, I don't even know how to explain this, like as one of the skills of it. But with New York Ninja, there's a really unique way to answer this question, I think. How do you know when the project is done? Because you could have kept editing New York Ninja forever, literally.
Yeah, that is a very difficult thing. What's the saying? Like, perfection is the enemy of good or something like that. I can't remember exactly what it is. I've always just had a timetable when I want to get things out and get them done. And so I just stay focused on that timetable. Sometimes it's my own created timetable, but usually it's something like a festival or something along those lines where it's like you kind of got to get it done for that time. And I think having that deadline works. So I would say if you are like a low budget filmmaker or any kind of filmmaker, but whether or not you're directing, editing, whatever you're doing, I would give yourself that timeline and you just have to call it at some point. You're always going to find problems with it later on. But you know what? If it's not out there for people to see, well, what good does it do? And I run into that with creative people a lot, is like they keep tinkering and they keep playing with things. And it's like sometimes you just have to call it and say, you know what, I'm going to put it out and see what happens. So.
What is the hardest part of your day-to-day job restoring these films?
Oh man. It sometimes, like, I don't want to say it can be monotonous, but it can. When you're sitting at a computer screen for hours on end, cleaning up little bits of dirt and dust, it can be a lot. You know, the one good thing is that because Vinegar Syndrome, we put out 4 movies a month at least, sometimes more when we're doing box sets and during our sales and all that. When you're doing 4 movies a month, you're always moving on to another movie, so at least you're looking at something new. And again, when we get to discover a film that we haven't seen before, that's always exciting. But it doesn't change the fact when you're just sitting at the computer for 8 hours a day, sometimes just cleaning up dirt and dust and scratches, it can be a little monotonous. But one of the good things is we go each restoration, because it's a very small crew here, so we do a little bit of everything. The restoration guys, we do the restoration, we do the QC, we do like the sound cleanup, all that kind of stuff. So we're all kind of working on these projects in various different ways. So it's almost like one week might be like a really heavy restoration week, and then by the end of the week you're just like, your eyeballs are burnt on the restoration, but then next week you're doing audio restoration or something, and then your ears are burnt and you're like, oh crap, I want to get back to restoration. So that is the one good thing. We are jumping around a lot, but yeah, I would say that they can get monotonous at times.
I don't think we've ever heard publicly like any details on the Vinegar Syndrome QC side. I know from working with other people how just intense some of these are. Like, some of these movies get watched like 32 times just to look literally scene by scene. Can you share what the VS QC process is like? Because not to name other boutiques necessarily, but it's not like VS is having problems every month, so you must be pretty good at it.
I mean, we try. Again, we have a small crew, but we're a good crew, and I think I don't know how other people run their QC, but the one good thing is, like, the guys that are doing the restorations are the ones doing the QC, so we kind of know what to look for.
Right.
We know the problems, we know the trouble spots, so we're not just like passively watching the films. But we try to go through multiple levels of QC. So there's QC that we do on we do the restoration, then we do a digital QC, like on a computer, like a digital file, and then we fix whatever problems we find in there, and then it goes to a disc, and the disc gets watched multiple times. And so we try to have redundancy in that, so that we try to catch as much as possible. Nobody's perfect. Obviously, we've done replacement discs.
Right.
Things happen in replication. Sometimes we do the best we can, and it's good for us. And then it goes to replication, and when it gets put on that disc, somebody there makes a mistake, and and then we don't discover it till it gets into the doors, and then there's only so much we can do about it at that point. So
right.
Mistakes get made, but it's really just, I think, one, the redundancy, and two, having people that know the things to look for, and that's just something you learn, unfortunately, by finding the mistakes. Compression issues, things like that. Not everybody has the eye for that. And I think, again, it's not something you really train for, but the more you do it, the more your eye gets trained for it. So
yeah, I think that talking to other people, that's one thing that I've noticed, is people don't understand that literally when you're talking about QC, we're talking 100% focus. You can't look away for a split second. A single frame could cause a massive fuck up. And you're like, I don't want to be the person that missed this, and then it's all over the forums for the next 6 months that VS is a failure or something. So it's a high pressure thing to be able to pay attention for the next 94 minutes. Yeah.
Well, when people say like, oh, you get to watch movies for your job, that must be great. And I'm like, it's not. It's not. QC is like the worst, because like, here's the thing is, by the time we're sitting there watching the movie, we've already watched it a lot.
Right.
It's never the first time we're seeing it. And then like you said, you have to stay focused. And if you don't, and you miss something, and like, we've all been the person that's missed something. I mean, even if we catch it and fix it, just the fact that we have to hit the brakes and go back and reauthor or fix whatever the problem is. I mean, we have bosses and we have people that we work with, and when we make mistakes, you hear about it, and you don't want to be the one that makes the mistake. I mean, there's times I've lost sleep where, we're on a tight deadline. All of a sudden there's a mistake and it's like, oh, that was my fault. I missed that, and then, you have trouble sleeping that night and you're like, damn, I should have been, and then you fix it and you move on and you try not to make that mistake again. So, it's all, trial by fire, unfortunately,
You have so many different parts of this process that you play a fairly large part in. And again, another thing I don't think we've heard publicly talked about, for anybody that doesn't know the whole process, could you take us through? A film comes into Vinegar Syndrome and it's going to be released on 4K. What is the entire process?
Yeah. So first we have to get the rights. That's step number one.
Which isn't a small part.
Which is sometimes the hardest part.
Right.
Everybody always asks, oh, how do you choose which movies? There's a multitude of ways that, things come to us. We go after certain things. We try to find producers. We have, studio deals, all that kind of stuff. But we get the rights. We get the materials. The materials come into our building. If sometimes certain foreign films, things in Europe, they won't let them out of the country, and then we have to have scans done overseas or whatever. But we try to avoid that as much as possible because, again, we have very good people here. Brandon Upson, for example, I will mention him as much as possible because he's been with the company from the very beginning. He's our resident scanner for the most part, and he is meticulous. And the scanning goes a long way. So the film comes in, it gets cleaned, it gets prepped. Any kind of physical damage that needs to be repaired, we try to repair it. Oscar Bescher, who you talked to, he's hands-on with that too, with the cleaning, fixing splices, that kind of thing. But there's the physical, restoration that we do in terms of cleaning it and getting it ready. Then it is digitally scanned. And again, there's a lot of mistakes that can be made in that stage. And I think that's where a lot of companies, unfortunately, make their mistakes is in the scanning. But the scanning gets done. Then we get a digital output, and it's usually we get each individual reel. And then it goes into one of the programs to get cleaned up. So then we go through, we remove the dirt, the dust, all that kind of stuff. After that, it usually goes to color. And while it's in color, somebody, generally myself, will work on sound sync. So because the sound is separate. So it's like if we have reels 1 through 5 of picture, we'll have reels 1 through 5 of sound. Now, in theory, those should sync up. That is not always the case. There's a lot of reasons why that stuff doesn't always work. And again, if there's different sources and we have to edit that stuff together. But then we basically create one version of the film that's, picture and sound, sync, lock, color, all that kind of stuff. That gets exported out. Sometimes it'll go through another restoration process after that. If we think it needs one, then it'll go through its first QC, which is to try to find any picture errors that might have been introduced or missed or anything like that. Sound, if there's pops, clicks, things of that nature that we can repair, then it'll come back out of QC, the first initial QC. We'll fix whatever fixes we can. At that point, if we think we're good, we'll call it. It then has to be authored and then put on discs. We do that in-house. We do our own temporary discs. We then take it into QC and they're watched multiple times. We have, certain stages of QC that we go through. And then once it passes all of those, if there's a problem, we got to hit the brakes. We got to go back and start again. But once it goes through all the stages of QC and it's approved from everybody, we sign off on it and then it's sent to replication. And then we wait about however many weeks or months, depending upon replication, to get it back. And then it goes out to the customer.
Jeez. Yeah, that's just a small undertaking for some of these films. And yet,
and again, we're doing that with at least 4 films a month. It's not like we're doing that with one film. Right. It's not like we're taking a year to work on one film. So it's a lot, and you have to be good at what you do. You have to be fast, and you have to be on. So I give a lot of credit to the guys that work here.
You mentioned other companies might make errors during the scanning process. What is some evidence of that? What's something that we could see on some of these?
Scanner lines. It's something that the average person won't notice, but it's a thing that can change whether or not we do Blu-ray versus UHD. Because if it's not scanned properly, or it's scanned on a lesser quality scanner, you can kind of see these like faint lines that are like baked into the image, and there's really nothing you can do about that. Also, on a lesser scanner, you can it can introduce more dirt and more problems that need to be fixed later on, and stability. If it's not a good scanner, the film might not go through as stable, and then you get people don't clean their scanners. Like, we meticulously clean our scanners here. So if somebody isn't cleaning their scanners, it can introduce a lot more problems that have to be fixed. And now, a lot of them are fixable, not all of them, but a lot of them are, but it just creates more time and effort. So,
right.
That's what it's like with this entire job, is like doing a good job at this phase so that the next phase goes smoothly, and trust me, you get too far down the road and you're like, oh crap, now we got to go back, and
right.
Nobody ever wants to go back. So
yeah, that go back is that's the last resort, it seems like, for many of these cases. Like I said, it's the week of the Halfway to Black Friday sale, and other than A Blade in the Dark, Navy SEALs, what is the Kurtis mixtape? If somebody wanted to say, man, I want the greatest hits, what should they pick up this week?
Definitely Sudden Fury, because I will always champion that one. It's one of our older releases, but it does not get a lot of love. It's kind of like a Canadian Coen Brothers film. It's like kind of a thriller. It's pretty bleak. I enjoy it. I'm a big fan of Miami Connection. New York Ninja played on a lot of double features with Miami Connection. If you've never seen that, it's like a fun martial arts film. Love it. I absolutely love it. It's got a great soundtrack, great score. So definitely Miami Connection, Sudden Fury, Death Promise. If you've seen,
God, I love Death Promise.
If you've seen New York Ninja and you like that, check out Death Promise, because it's similar. It's kind of a little bit closer to what New York Ninja probably would have been, or what I wanted it to be. Like, I tried to use that as an inspiration to, because to be honest, if New York Ninja came out when it did in the 80s, it probably would have been an absolute mess, if I'm being 100% honest. But but it's close in tone and theme, and that's kind of what I tried to go for. So I'm trying to think what else. Candy Snatchers. That's another one that I think goes overlooked sometimes. It's another sort of bleak film. If you like Sudden Fury, I think check out Candy Snatchers. It was one that I was very excited that we were putting out at the time, and I don't think it's really gotten the love that it deserved. So
not at all.
Candy Snatchers is definitely another one. Just trying to think. It's hard to think. There's so many movies. I'm going to look at our list later and be like, I should have said that one.
And Sudden Fury is out of print, by the way, so people can't even pick that up.
Oh crap! Yeah, that shows what I. Okay, we'll go.
Snatchers is one of those ones that you watch the movie and you go, damn, I love that, and then you watch the special features and the director's sitting there going, why do people care about this movie?
Yeah. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of directors that kind of like look at their films and are like, I don't. Why does anybody care about this? And it's like, we care. Like, trust us, we care. Well, yeah, I didn't realize Sudden Fury was shows what I know. I mean, we have so many movies. I'm trying to think of what else. Righting Wrongs. If you haven't seen Righting Wrongs, we're big fans of Cynthia Rothrock here.
Oh, yeah.
We love her movies, and we've done as much as we can to get as many of them out as possible. If you're new to Hong Kong martial arts films, I would recommend Righting Wrongs to start with. If you're not, and you've seen a bunch of them and you haven't seen Righting Wrongs, I recommend it. The fight scenes are great. It's really interesting, not to get too deep on the Hong Kong films, but a lot of them, there's usually multiple cuts. So a lot of our martial arts films, we have to present multiple cuts because they played in different countries, or like mainland China versus Hong Kong. But what's really interesting about righting wrongs is that they're drastically different in the tone and the endings. So I think it kind of gives you an idea of like, this is back to the restoration side of things. We have to make sure we get the multiple cuts and try to present the versions of the film that have been out there, and all of those have their own QC and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of work went into righting wrongs. That was one of our earlier Hong Kong projects, so I'm particularly fond of that one.
And then obviously, if you're going for a Kurtis Greatest Hits, you got to pick up New York Ninja.
New York Ninja, yes.
Kurtis, this has been astonishing. Thank you so much for spending the time to talk about all this. There's so much that people are kind of hungry to know about, and I feel like Vinegar Syndrome is one of those companies. Obviously, there's a lot of moving parts, but the cool thing is most of the people involved are allowed to talk about it and have a persona per se. And I think nowadays, especially for this industry, that's kind of what is leading to people wanting to buy from some of these companies. There are some random boutiques that you've never heard from them. You don't know why they put these movies out. You don't get to hear their restoration artists saying that they love Navy SEALs. So why would they buy their releases? It's not the same sort of thing.
Yeah, no, we are 100% passionate about the films, not just these films in general, but like these films. Like we are usually pretty big champions of the films that we release. But we are all 100% movie people here. I mean, trust me when I say it's pretty much all we talk about all day. So we're working on movies while talking about movies, and then we go home and we watch movies, and then we come back in and we talk about those movies. So that's, we are definitely film fans here, and there are real people working on these things. And, I just also have to give a shout out to our shipping department, because they are the unsung heroes. They don't get to do the podcasts and the interviews and stuff like that. So, but they work hard down there, and there are real people shipping out real packages, and there's a lot of them. And, in our sales, we get slammed, and they work very hard and they work long hours. And let me tell you, I've done it, and packing boxes is not fun. So, shout out to our shipping department. So,
one of these days, I got to get Evie on the show, I think.
She would have a whole different perspective of, I love our customers. I love everybody that supports us. But, sometimes customer service can be difficult. And, I just
say the least.
To anybody listening to this, just be patient. You'll get your package. We love all of our customers. We want to do right by you guys. Just know that there are real people with real lives, and we are, working hard to get your packages out. We are not an Amazon. We are not, some big company. We don't have another fulfillment center like I can go downstairs right now into the shipping department and go say hi to everybody. We're like a tight knit family around here, and they are the unsung heroes of this company. So,
well said. Thanks again, Kurtis. Everybody go support Vinegar Syndrome during the Halfway to Black Friday sale. Congrats on New York Ninja again, and thanks for your time.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Hello, this is Chris Haskell from They Live by Film. For those that don't know us, Adam, Zach, and we built a podcast over the last 2 years that's a combination of film discussion from 3 very different perspectives, as well as industry interviews with the leaders in boutique Blu-ray and 4K community. We started with Dev Crocodile, but over time we've been lucky enough to speak with Arrow Video, Severin, Mondo Macabro, Vinegar Syndrome, Radiance, Indicator, most of the OCN partner labels. It's been a blast. You can find us wherever you podcast, and also actually recently as part of Someone's Favorite Production Podcast Network. We hope to see you online.
Thank you for listening to the Disconnected Podcast. There's one big thing that you could do to help the show, and that is to leave a rating and review on the podcast service of your choice. Thank you.